All right. So are you ready to take a deep dive with me into the wild world of modern dating?
Always ready for a deep dive, especially in a topic that's, as constantly evolving as dating is.
Exactly. And it feels like it's changing faster than ever,
Hmm.
like by the minute, especially in 2025.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a whole new ball game out there.
It is a whole new ball game. It really is.
So we're going to look at some TikToks today, and
Yeah.
we've got two that are kind of like on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
We have one from a single woman,
Mm.
and she is like over it. She's done with dating apps. She is so frustrated.
Yeah.
And then we have a counterpoint from a guy who calls himself an older man.
Okay.
And he's like a dating coach, relationship coach kind of guy. And he has some thoughts about this woman's experience.
I am intrigued already. I mean, just hearing like those two very distinct voices, I think is really fascinating because it really does speak to this kind of like this tension that exists around dating today. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to dive.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of unpack these two perspectives and kind of see what we can learn from both of them.
Yeah.
See what resonates with us, what maybe doesn't resonate with us. And hopefully you listening out there can kind of glean some insights for yourself.
For sure. For sure.
So should we start with the single woman?
Yeah, let's hear her perspective. Let's hear what's going on in her world.
Okay. So she starts out by saying that she went on 5 first dates last year.
Wow.
And only one of those turned into a situationship. And that was her word, not mine.
Okay. All right. Interesting.
So 5 first dates, 1 situationship. And of those 5 first dates, she was ghosted by 3 of them.
Oof. That's a tough stat right there.
It is a tough stat. And then one of them turned into like a cheating scandal.
Oh.
And the last one, the situationship guy, she thought he was the one,
Mm-hmm.
but he was not feeling it.
Oh, so she really only had like one that even came close to like, being something.
Right. And so she's like, I'm done. I'm throwing in the towel in these dating apps.
Yeah, I can understand her frustration.
Right. And so her big takeaway is that dating apps in 2025 only benefit the top like 10 or 20% of men.
That's an interesting perspective. I mean, it really does feel like the apps can sometimes create this sort of like a hierarchy or this uneven playing field.
Totally. And so she's like, forget it. I'm done playing this rigged game. I'm going to make my own rules.
Okay. I like where this is going. I like her energy.
Yeah. So her new strategy is to start pursuing men who are out of her league.
Out of her league. Okay, that's bold.
It is bold. She's like, I'm just going to go for it.
Mm.
And her reasoning is that even if they reject her, which she's kind of expecting,
Mm-hmm.
it won't hurt as much because it's already built into her expectations.
So she's like sort of like managing her expectations from the get-go.
Exactly. Like if she gets rejected, she's like, okay, well, that was the plan anyway.
Yeah, I can see the logic there. Like you're not setting yourself up for disappointment.
Exactly.
But it does beg the question, like who defines these leagues anyway, right? Like what constitutes being out of someone's league?
Yeah, and she does get into that a little bit. And she basically says that like dating men below your league can only ever meet expectations, never exceed them.
Okay, I see.
And she's like, I want those A+++ experiences.
Those like mind-blowing.
Yes, is like blow your mind kind of connections.
I can definitely relate to that, like wanting to be wowed, wanting to have those experiences that are just like truly exceptional.
Yes, and so she's like, I'm not going to find that with these guys who are just meeting the bare minimum,
Okay, so she's raising the bar. She's like, I know what I want, and I'm not going to settle for anything less.
Exactly. She's like, I deserve to be wowed.
Yeah, good for her.
And this kind of leads into her next point, which is about matching men's energy levels on dates.
Okay, this is an interesting one. I've heard this advice before, but I'm curious to see how she applies it.
So she's basically saying that if a guy is low energy, she's going to dial it back too.
So like meeting them where they're at.
Exactly. She's like, I'm not going to go above and beyond anymore if they're not bringing it. I'm not bringing it here.
So it's like an energy exchange kind of thing.
Totally.
But I wonder if that could backfire. Like what if by matching their low energy, you're actually like dimming your own light?
That's a really good point. And she actually shares an anecdote about a date where she did exactly that.
Oh, really?
She matched the guy's low energy, and guess what?
What?
She never heard from him again.
Oh, so maybe always mirroring isn't the best strategy.
Right. It's like you can be adaptable and you can meet people where they're at, but you don't want to lose yourself in the process.
Exactly. You got to stay true to yourself and your own energy.
Totally. And so it seems like she's starting to realize this because she ends her TikTok by saying that she's all about setting strong boundaries now.
Okay. I like the setting boundaries is huge.
Yeah. And she's like, I'm walking away from anything that doesn't serve me.
Good for her. I mean, it sounds like she's really starting to prioritize her own needs and her own well-being.
Exactly. And she's like, I'm done chasing after validation.
Yeah, right.
I'm going to focus on becoming a high-value woman.
Okay, so we're starting to see a shift in her mindset, moving away from external validation and toward like defining her own worth.
Totally. And that's where the older man comes in with his perspective.
Okay. Yeah, let's hear what Mr. Relationship Guru has to say about all this.
He has some thoughts.
I bet he does.
So he's been on both sides of the dating game. He's been the sought-after bachelor, and he's been a husband for over 20 years.
Okay, so he's got some experience under his belt.
He does, and he starts out by saying that women need a major mindset shift.
Ooh, a mindset shift.
Okay, I'm listening. And he keeps repeating this idea that women should focus on what they bring to the table rather than what they expect from men.
Interesting. So he's like flipping the script a little bit.
He is. He's like, stop focusing on what you want from a man
Mm-hmm.
and start thinking about what you have to offer.
Okay, I can see how that could be a valuable perspective shift.
Yeah, and he actually makes a pretty bold statement.
What's that?
He says that a lot of women have nothing to offer.
Whoa. Okay, that's a strong statement. I'm curious to hear where he's going with that.
Yeah, it definitely caught my attention too. And he specifically calls out intimacy. He's like, that's become an overused currency in the dating world.
So it's like he's saying that physical intimacy is not enough anymore.
Yeah, he's like, it's expected, it's not special, it's not unique.
It's like a bare minimum.
Exactly. And so he's challenging women to think about what else they bring to a relationship besides just that.
Okay, so what does he suggest women should focus on then?
Well, he's a big advocate for traditional femininity.
Traditional femininity. Okay, so we're talking like nurturing, supportive.
Exactly. He uses the word blessing a lot. Like a woman should be a blessing in a man's life.
Blessing. Okay, that's an interesting word choice for sure. It definitely evokes a very specific kind of image.
It does. And this is where we start to see a really clear contrast with the single woman's perspective.
Right. She's like bucking those traditional expectations and he's like doubling down on them.
Exactly. And so it's going to be interesting to see how he responds to her specifically, because he does address her situation directly in his TikTok.
Oh, he does. This is getting juicy.
Yeah, he basically says that she's not qualified for the men she's pursuing.
Ouch. Okay, so he's basically saying she's aiming too high.
Yeah, he's like, you need to reevaluate your standards. And he specifically calls out her strategy of matching men's energy levels.
Oh, I bet he's not a fan of that.
He is not. He's like, if a guy's low energy, you shouldn't match it. You should bring the positive energy. You should be the light.
So he's like, be the feminine energy that uplifts and inspires.
Exactly. And he even brings up his own marriage as an example.
Okay, let's hear it.
He's been married for over 20 years, and he says that he and his wife are constantly pouring into each other.
Pouring into each other. Okay, that's a very visual metaphor. I can see what he's getting at.
Yeah, like they're constantly giving and receiving love and support.
So he's presenting this very like traditional model of a successful marriage.
He is, and he's basically saying that if women want to attract high-value men, they need to become high-value women.
Okay, so now we're getting into this whole high-value concept.
We are, and he actually defines what that means for both men and women.
All right, lay it on me. What's his definition of high value?
So for men, it's all about income provision, protection, honesty, integrity, influence network.
So very much like the traditional provider-protector role.
Exactly. And then for women,
This should be good.
it's preserves her body, modest feminine fit, speaks gently assertive but not aggressive, diffuses situations, asks questions, reciprocates energy, maternal nurturing.
Wow, that's a mouthful. It's like he took every traditional feminine quality and put it into a blender.
He basically did. And so he ends his TikTok by saying, like, if you want to find a high-value man, just focus on becoming a high-value woman and let the right man find you.
So it's like he's saying the responsibility is on women to attract the right partner.
Exactly. And that's where we're going to leave it for now.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. We've got a lot to unpack here.
These are two very different perspectives, and I'm curious to hear what you're thinking so far.
Well, I think it's safe to say we've uncovered a real tension point in modern dating, this push and pull between deeply ingrained societal expectations and the evolving desires of both men and women.
Yeah, it's like everyone's trying to figure out the rules of the game while the rule book is constantly being rewritten.
Adding another layer to this complexity, the older man suggests that women's attempts to level the playing field by focusing on careers and financial independence might actually be backfiring.
He seems to believe that embracing traditionally masculine traits like ambition and financial success somehow diminishes a woman's feminine value in the eyes of men.
It's a controversial take for sure, and it taps into a broader societal conversation about gender roles and how they intersect with romantic relationships.
So are we saying women have to choose between success and desirability? That's a pretty tough pill to swallow.
I don't think it's about making a choice, but rather about finding a balance that feels authentic and fulfilling for each individual. The challenge lies in navigating those societal expectations while staying true to yourself.
That's easier said than done, right? Especially with voices like the older man, promoting very specific and somewhat rigid definitions of what constitutes a high-value man or woman.
Absolutely. And that's why it's crucial to examine these definitions critically and challenge the assumptions they're based on. For example, his emphasis on a woman's physical appearance and demeanor, preserving her body, being modest, speaking gently, nurturing others. These qualities are often associated with traditional notions of femininity, which can be quite limiting.
It's like he's stuck in a time warp where women are expected to be delicate flowers who need a man to protect and provide for them.
Meanwhile, we have the single woman actively trying to rewrite the script. She's rejecting the idea that she needs to fit into a predefined box to be worthy of love and attention.
She's taking control of her dating life and going after what she wants, even if it means defying societal expectations.
Which is incredibly empowering, but it also highlights the challenges women often face when they try to break free from traditional gender roles. They are often met with resistance and judgment not just from men, but also from other women.
The older man's commentary is a perfect example of this. He criticizes the single woman for her ambition and desire to date men out of her league. It's almost as if he sees her actions as a threat to the established order, a disruption of the power dynamics he believes should govern relationships.
This is where things get really interesting because it reveals the underlying anxieties that fuel so much the conflict between men and women in the dating world.
So what are these anxieties exactly?
Well, on one hand, you have men who might be feeling threatened by women's growing economic and social power. They're used to being the providers and protectors, and they're struggling to adapt to a world where women are no longer financially dependent on them.
That makes sense. It's a shift in the balance of power that can be unsettling for some.
And on the other hand, you have women who are tired of being judged and valued solely based on their appearance and ability to fulfill traditional gender roles.
They want to be seen as equals both in the workplace and in their relationships. They want their ambitions and achievements to be celebrated, not seen as a threat.
Exactly. And this clash of expectations and anxieties creates a breeding ground for misunderstanding and resentment.
Which explains why the dating landscape can feel like such a minefield these days.
It's like everyone's walking on eggshells, afraid to say or do the wrong thing for fear of judgment or rejection.
So how do we navigate this minefield? How do we create healthy and fulfilling relationships in a world where the rules are constantly changing and everyone seems to have a different playbook?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's one we'll continue to explore in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look for those nuggets of wisdom that can help us all move forward with more clarity and intention.
Stay tuned, folks, because this conversation is far from over.
So where do we go from here? I mean, we've got these two very different perspectives on dating in 2025.
Right, and I think what's really interesting is that they both kind of highlight this tension between tradition and, like, modern expectations.
Exactly, like this push and pull between what society has traditionally told us about relationships and what we're actually experiencing in the real world.
Totally. And the older man's perspective is like very much rooted in tradition.
Yeah, he's very much coming from that like old school playbook.
He is. And I think it's important to acknowledge that like that perspective does resonate with some people.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there are plenty of people who still value those traditional roles and expectations.
Right. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But
Yeah.
I think the problem arises when those traditional expectations become limiting or restrictive.
Exactly, like when they start to dictate how we're supposed to behave or who we're supposed to be.
And I think that's where the single woman's perspective comes in. She's like, I'm not going to be put in a box. I'm going to make my own rules.
Right, she's challenging those traditional expectations. And I think that's really important because it opens up the possibility for new ways of relating to each other.
Totally. And I think it's also important to note that, like, not everyone wants the same things out of a relationship.
Oh, absolutely, right? Like, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to dating or relationships.
And I think that's something that the older man doesn't really seem to acknowledge.
Yeah, he seems to be operating under the assumption that all women want the same thing, which is just not true.
And I think that's one of the reasons why his advice can feel so outdated or out of touch.
Yeah, like his definition of a high-value woman is very specific, And it doesn't leave a lot of room for individuality.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important to be self-aware and to know what you want out of a relationship.
Totally, because if you don't know what you want, you're just going to be chasing after other people's expectations.
And you're going to end up feeling lost and unfulfilled.
Exactly. So how do we navigate this then? Like, how do we find that balance between honoring our own needs and desires and also navigating those societal expectations?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer.
No, I don't think there is either, but I think a good place to start is with communication.
Okay, like that. Talk about it.
Yeah, like have those open and honest conversations with yourself, first and foremost.
What do I want? What are my non-negotiables? What am I willing to compromise on?
Exactly. And then once you have a better understanding of your own needs and desires, you can start to communicate them to potential partners.
And that's where things can get tricky because not everyone is going to be receptive to those conversations.
True, but I think it's better to have those tough conversations early on than to waste time with someone who's not on the same page.
Totally. And I think that's where those strong boundaries come in.
Right, like knowing when to walk away from a situation that's not serving you.
Exactly. And that can be really hard, especially if you're someone who's used to people-pleasing or putting other people's needs before your own.
It can be, but it's so important for your own well-being and for the health of your relationships.
Totally. And I think that's something that both the single woman and the older man kind of touch on in their own way.
How so?
Well, the single woman is all about setting those boundaries and walking away from anything that doesn't feel right.
Yeah, she's not afraid to say no.
She's not. And the older man, while I don't necessarily agree with all of his advice, I do think he's right about one thing.
What's that?
You have to know your worth.
Okay, I can get behind that. You got to know your worth.
And I think that's the key to navigating all of this craziness that is modern dating.
It's about knowing what you bring to the table and not settling for anything less than you deserve.
And being confident in who you are and what you want.
And not being afraid to go after it.
Totally.
So to sum it up, it sounds like modern dating in 2025 is a mix of exciting possibilities and challenging contradictions.
It's a wild ride for sure.
But at the end of the day, it's about finding what works for you and creating relationships that are authentic, fulfilling, and respectful.
Absolutely. And I think that's a message that we can all get behind.
I agree.
So what do you say we move on to part 3 and wrap up this deep dive with some final thoughts and takeaways?
Let's do it. I'm ready to synthesize all of this wisdom and see what nuggets of truth we can glean for ourselves.
All right, let's dive in. Okay, so we've explored the battlefield, we've met the opposing forces, but now we need a strategy. How do we actually navigate this ever-shifting world of dating in 2025 and beyond?
You know, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that there's no one-size-fits-all answer, right? Like, what worked in the past might not work now, and what works for one person might not work for another.
So we're all just making it up as we go along.
Yeah.
That's both exciting and terrifying at the same time.
It is. It is. But that doesn't mean we're doomed to wander aimlessly in the dating wilderness. You know, there's some guiding principles we can use to find our way.
I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What are these principles?
Well, I think above all else, self-awareness is paramount, right? Like understanding your values, your needs, your desires. That's crucial before you even start thinking about a partner.
So it's not about finding someone to complete us, but more about understanding ourselves first.
Exactly. And part of that self-awareness involves recognizing our own biases and expectations, right? We all come to relationships with baggage, whether it's from our upbringing, past experiences, societal conditioning.
So step 1 is like unpacking those bags and taking inventory of what we're bringing to the table.
Precisely. Once you've done that internal work, you can start to approach dating with more intentionality, right? Instead of just swiping endlessly or chasing after whoever seems out of your league, you focus on connecting with people who share your values and who bring out the best in you.
It sounds like we need to shift our focus from external validation to internal alignment, like finding that sense of wholeness within ourselves first.
That's a great way to put it. It's about finding someone who compliments you, not completes you.
And someone who respects you for who you are, not who they think you should be.
Absolutely. Mutual respect is the foundation of any healthy relationship. And that respect should extend to each other's choices and aspirations, even if they don't fit neatly into those traditional gender roles.
So what about this whole high-value concept? Is there any merit to that idea, or is it just another way to judge and compare ourselves to others?
Honestly, I think the term itself can be problematic because it implies a hierarchy of worth. But the underlying principle that we should strive to be the best versions of ourselves, I think that's a valuable one.
So it's about personal growth and self-improvement, not about meeting some arbitrary standard set by society or, a self-proclaimed relationship guru on TikTok.
Exactly. Ultimately, the most important thing is to find someone who celebrates your strengths and supports your growth both as individuals and as a couple.
Someone who makes you feel seen, valued, and loved for exactly who you are.
Now, that's a relationship worth striving for.
So to sum it all up, modern dating in 2025. It's a bit of a wild ride. There's no map. The rules are constantly changing, and everyone's trying to figure it out as they go. But amidst all the chaos and confusion, there's also a sense of liberation and possibility. We're breaking free from outdated norms and creating new ways of relating to each other.
It's exciting and maybe a little daunting, but ultimately, we have the opportunity to define what healthy relationships look like in this new era.
And who knows, maybe by sharing our stories and learning from each other, we can actually make dating a little less confusing and a lot more fulfilling in the years to come. Thanks for diving in with us.